Hello and welcome to my April book wrap up. I don't know why it feels so weird to say that, but we are going over the books that I read during April. I actually, surprisingly, this month was able to read a lot more than any of the previous months so far this year, I think it was just a mix of having a lot more free time, which I was really anticipating this month, and I'm glad that it came true because the last few months I kept thinking to myself like I'm gonna be so much more free this time, and I wasn't. But April turned out to be a really good reading month for me, and I got through a lot of different books. I actually only got through 2 of my physical books that I own. Everything else was library loans, and that's because I had like a week of library reading, which is like a whole vlog that's coming to you soon. Let's talk about the books that I read this month. I actually haven't counted to see how many I read in April yet, so let me do that really quickly. I read 13 books in April, which is, again, like way more than I have read any other month this year, and I think even last year. But it's because I have like way more free time, and I also was listening to a lot of more audiobooks than usual. I also, like, one of the books I literally read during a road trip. It took me the whole drive, but I read one book like that whole time. It's like actually really surprising, but I'm glad because I had a really good reading month just overall. And for some reason, I don't know if this felt the same for anyone else, but I felt like April was just such a long month, and not necessarily in a bad way, but it did feel super long. Let's just get started because I do have a lot to talk to you about, and I don't want this video to get super long. The first one was 1984, which this was a book that I read for my physical books reading vlog, which came out I think a few weeks ago. And I don't know if you can hear the train in the background, but if you can, I guess let's just call it part of the ambience. Yeah, I made a whole reading vlog on this book and Martyr. And it mostly ended up being like focused on this book because I had such a like wonderful time with this. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it, but I highly recommend. This is definitely one of my new favorite books of all time. I probably should sit down at some point and figure out what my top 10 books are, but I feel like that would be an impossible task. But I do know for sure that like this is on that list. So highly recommend 1984 by George Orwell. The next book that I finished and read in April was One Dark Window by Rachel Gilig. So this is a fantasy series, and I listened to this on audiobook, so that might have influenced how I felt about it, but I actually wasn't super into it. Like, I don't know if I'm just not the audience for it. I don't know if I don't know, for some reason I just didn't like it as much as I know a lot of people really like it. There are a lot of people that I know and follow their reviews and stuff that really like the series. So I went in thinking that I was gonna like it too, because usually my tastes with those people kind of align. But for some reason it just was not for me. I didn't enjoy it very much. I mean, like, I could see the appeal, and the magic system was pretty unique. So it's the system where you get your magic from like tapping one of, I think, 12 cards. Is it 12 cards? And the magic system is pretty balanced. So if you use whichever card for a long amount of time in like relation to whatever the power is that it gives you, you'll also have a cost and stuff. I thought that it was fine. I wasn't super blown out of the water, but I also feel like even though historically fantasy's always been my favorite genre, I'm kind of skewing away from it recently, which I don't know why. I'm kind of scared. I don't know if it's because I'm not enjoying the fantasy books that I'm reading, or if it's because I'm like just enjoying fantasy less, but I really hope it's the former and not the latter. I read this like early April, and I've had a very long month, so I don't remember too much. Like, I know that there was a romance in there, but I just wasn't really convinced. I didn't really like it. Not to say it's a bad book, like, it's not a bad book by any means, but it just wasn't my cup of tea. The next book that I read was a recommendation from my brother, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. And this was like super funny. I was really surprised that, like, I don't know if this is a spoiler because it happens right at the beginning of the book. but I guess potential spoilers. But like, I was so shocked that the earth is just destroyed in the first like 5 seconds of the book, because I was just like, wait, I thought like more was gonna happen, but like most of the time was on like a spaceship or something, and then they were talking mice, like talking scientific mice at the, like, it was just so funny. I literally wrote in my notes just silly goofy vibes overall. I feel like that's a book that I could like easily reread at some point too, because it was just pure fun and I really enjoyed it. It was short and sweet and fun. It did what it did. I don't really have notes because it was just funny. I wasn't as in it for the plot, I feel like, because the plot just felt so wacky, but maybe that's just me. The next book that I read was Hungerstone by Kat Dunn. So this is like a Carmilla vampire retelling. I haven't actually read Carmilla, but I've been wanting to. Like, that's one of the things on my TBR list that I really, really want to get to at some point soon. Even not knowing that, I just feel, or maybe especially not being familiar with the Carmilla's story, I hesitate, because I remember as I was listening to it, I was feeling a lot of like reluctance to pick it up. And usually for me with an audiobook, that's not a good sign, because that just means I'm not super interested. I think it was that it felt like it was just such a slow, mostly uneventful, just very slow-paced story, and it kind of got boring for me at a certain point. I wanted more of the relationship. I wanted more of the development of the characters, and I didn't feel like I was getting that. So I was kind of disappointed, because obviously you're not supposed to judge books by their cover, but based on the cover, I really liked it. And I liked the cover, and I was like really interested, especially knowing that it was like a vampire retelling. But even like the vampire aspect of it, I didn't feel like that was even a thing. Like, as I was reading, I was like second guessing whether or not it was even a vampire story, because like the way that it was marketed to me, and then I'd been like hearing about it, was that it's like a Carmilla, which is like the vampire retelling, and like it was gonna be vampire and like seductive and this and that. I just didn't feel like I really got that. And there were certain events in the story that I just didn't love, because maybe it's like this is a subjective thing, because I did want it to go a certain way and it didn't, with some of like the character relationships. Specifically, there's this one character, I forget her name now. There's this one female character that keeps like popping in and out of the narrative, aside from Carmilla. And I kind of thought that the narrator was going to be developing a relationship with this character, but instead that character was like doing different, I don't know, I just didn't, it wasn't what I was hoping for from this novel. And I don't know if it's because my expectations were not like set correctly, or if it just didn't land what it was intending to, but for whatever reason, this was just kind of a miss for me, and I was really disappointed, because I was excited to pick this one up. I will say the one good thing that came out of this and reading this was that I want to read Carmilla even more than I did before, so hopefully I'll get to that soon. And then the next book that I read was a non-fiction book, Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green. This was so informative. First of all, again, it was a book read by the author themselves, so I really, really love that. I love audiobooks read by the narrator, like writer themselves. I don't know why I'm finding it so hard to say that. But besides that, like, I didn't expect a book on tuberculosis to be so interesting, and I just felt like I was learning so much. And genuinely, as I was listening to this, like, I'd be vacuuming or I'd be washing dishes, and I'd legitimately out loud be like, wow, whenever John Green would like state a fact or something about tuberculosis, or about historical figures that had consumption or tuberculosis that I didn't know. And I was convinced by the end of it that like everything is tuberculosis for real. But beyond that, I just loved how he used tuberculosis and the kind of like research and talking about that to really get to the core of this novel, which is the issues with healthcare inequality, and the huge disparity between like developing and developed countries, and how like beyond the healthcare systems that we have at home in America. There's like a global healthcare crisis going on wherein we should, like, tuberculosis, and this is something he says in the book, it's like tuberculosis should not exist at this point because it is something that is completely curable. It is something that we as a society, like as a global society, could get rid of, and we're just not because of money. So I really thought it was so well done that he uses tuberculosis, which is like one specific illness, to then kind of widen the lens and show us the problems with like healthcare inequality and inequity globally. Like, tell us about that. So yeah, I mean, I kind of wished as I was reading that I had a physical copy that I could highlight because there was so much information, like I couldn't memorize the whole book, but it was really good. I'm really glad that I picked it up in the spur of the moment because it hadn't really been on my TBR. I just saw it was available and I decided to just pick it up. I'm really glad that I did. Next book that I read was Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe, and there is so much in this novel. I absolutely loved it. I had such a good time reading it. This actually took me a long time, and not because it was bad or slow or anything. It was literally because I was savoring it, and every night, literally every night before bed, I was reading like 5%, 10% of the novel and just reading like one chapter or something. I read it very slowly and I'm really glad that I did. So much going on that I picked up on, but I felt like because I didn't have enough background knowledge, there was also a lot that I wasn't picking up on. These ideas of tradition versus modernism, the idea of like preserving a culture versus that culture being infringed upon or threatened by modernity, especially in regards to like in this novel at a certain point, you're learning about the traditions and the culture and the spiritual beliefs of this society. And then at a certain point in the novel, like, what's it called? Christian missionaries, I think it's missionaries. Christian missionaries come and start to like threaten the societal structures that exist within this village. There was also a lot of like toxic masculinity and kind of like generational inheritance, but not material, although that's part of it too. But there was a lot about like the main character, Okwanko, is literally like making it his life's purpose to avoid being like his father, because he feels like his father was like a failure. His father was very effeminate. His father wasn't masculine enough. And so he is trying to be the complete opposite of that. And he wants to prove that he's a man and he is strong and powerful. He's not weak. But what I found really fascinating is that he actually, like, among his children, values one of his daughters the most. And it was interesting because he kept thinking to himself, like, I wish this daughter of mine was a son. Which was just such a fascinating detail because it came up so many times. It's like, out of all his children, he has a lot of daughters and he has a lot of sons. There's this one daughter of his that he keeps thinking to himself that he really loves, and they have a very good relationship, father-daughter relationship, and he keeps thinking to himself, like, I wish that she was a boy. So I really enjoyed this. I thought it was so fascinating, and the writing was just very different from other books that I've read. I don't remember exactly how I came to decide to read it, but I think it was like probably it was available in my library. I've been reading a lot from my library, and when I saw that it was available, I just started reading it and I was so engrossed. And it was really one of those books that I wanted to take my time with because I loved being engrossed in it. I don't know why. Like, I do know why, because like there was just so much. There's even these scenes kind of giving you insight into the spiritual beliefs and just the different customs and traditions and the different celebrations that they had was just so fascinating. I just loved it so much. Then the next book that I read was Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. I tried to make a vlog on this, but I read it so fast that it ended up being more of an analysis. So I'll just link that, but suffice it to say that I really enjoyed this. I do want to add something that I didn't have in my original video, which was that having sat with it for a little bit longer, because I think I recorded that video literally like a few days after reading it, but now at this point it's been like a couple of weeks maybe. I do suspect that this was a little more heavy-handed than the original trilogy was. I don't dislike that. I think that it still worked, even though it was a little bit more like this is what I'm trying to teach you with this. But I do think that it was a little more heavy-handed than the original trilogy. Yeah, I really did enjoy this and I had a good time. It's always so fun when I can go back to like the Hunger Games world and like think about it and write about it and just be engrossed in it. So that was Sunrise on the Reaping. The next book that I read on my Kindle, which this is an ad, I didn't want to pay $20 to take off the ads. I actually think it's so ridiculous that Kindle wants, like, that Amazon is trying to charge you to remove ads when you pay so much for a Kindle anyway. But anyway, the next book that I read was The Dream Thieves by Maggie Stiefvater, and I just loved that book so much. Okay, I loved it so much. It was so insane. I am concerned for Adam. Towards the end of The Raven Boys, the first book in the series, I really did love Ronan, but this book made me like him even more. I said this when I did my reading vlog for the first book, but I truly just love the way that Maggie Stiefvater writes. As I read more and more of this, I just wish I read it when I was slightly younger, because I think I would have been obsessed. Not to say that I'm not right now, like I'm literally having so much fun, and I actually have the next book on my Kindle. Literally just got it in like 3 days ago. Blue Lily, Lily Blue. Like I literally have it. I'm going to read it soon. Just had such a good time. I'm obsessed with the idea, and like this might be spoilers, although like I feel like it's not because of the title, but just in case you want to skip ahead. I'm obsessed with the idea of stealing from dreams, okay? And it really reminded me of Inkheart. I was obsessed with Inkheart growing up. I literally loved those books so much. And I remember I was obsessed with the movie as well, and I watched it so many times. Now looking back on it, it wasn't that great of a movie, but I really loved Inkheart. And so this like literally rekindled my Inkheart heart. In that one, I don't know if I said this already, but in that one, in Inkheart, the reader could steal things out of books in a way, and this just reminded me of that with like the stealing things from the dream, and it was just so amazing. And also that scene with Gansey and Blue, if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. That's all I'm gonna say. It was so good. I'm so excited to read the next book, which is literally, I have it. So I'm hoping to read it in May, which May is shaping up to be like the most free month that I've had in the last 3 years. So we'll see what happens. There was a part of me that was kind of wishing that I had done a reading vlog, because I loved doing the vlog for the first book and it was so fun recording my thoughts and stuff. But at the same time, there is something so sweet about just breezing through a book and just reading it so fast because you're enjoying it, and that's definitely what happened with this one. So anyways, that's The Dream Thieves. The next book that I read was The Wilde Huntress by Emily Lloyd Jones. So as far as I was aware, it was like a fantasy standalone novel, kind of romantic-ish, but the romance is very light. Like it's very, very light romance, in the sense that I don't think there was like any smut, which I was okay with. Like that wasn't really something that was make it or break it for me at all. When I got to the end, in the acknowledgements, apparently one of the characters in this book was a character from another one of her books. I'm not super familiar with her books, so I don't really know anything about that. But I did really like the folklore and the kind of myths that it played with. I'm trying to remember my thoughts on this because I remember the plot. Basically, these characters end up joining the Wild Hunt. They're trying to kind of like, each one of them has something that they're trying to achieve by joining the Wild Hunt. I will say I did love, there was like certain relationships and friendship relationships that I really loved. There were twists at the end that I didn't expect, but my brain was not like working at all to figure out what was going to happen next. I was just kind of going with the flow. There were some things that happened that I didn't love. There were also a couple of questions that just, I felt like they were left unanswered, and maybe on purpose, but I didn't love that they were left unanswered. And my main thought was that it just, for as serious as it felt like it was trying to be, as I was reading, the stakes just felt, for me, just felt very low. So I wasn't really sure what to feel or think about it, because things that were happening in the Wild Hunt felt serious. Like, it felt like, oh my god, someone's gonna die, people are gonna die, they're gonna lose their lives, they're gonna suffer, blah. But there was no point during my reading of this that I felt any sort of like stress or tension for the characters. Then when certain things were happening, I was like, oh, that really sucks. You know, I wasn't super invested is what I'll say, which, like, fair, I guess. I don't think that was necessarily a bad thing. I did enjoy it. It wasn't the worst book that I read this month by any means. So take from that what you will. I would say that, like, if you're looking for a very light romance, fun fantasy, I would pick it up. It really just did what I needed it to do, but it wasn't like a new favorite. I think for me it was just good. Like, it wasn't super memorable, but it wasn't like really bad either. It was just good. The next book that I read, which was one of my favorites that I read this month, was Lady Macbeth by Ava Reid. This was one of my most anticipated reads of 2024, but I didn't get around to reading it until this year, and I really did make the intention that I wanted to read it this year finally. I realized reading this and also reading the last book that I finished this month, which I'll actually talk about. I'll also talk about it like right after this, even though it was one of the last books I read this month. But I noticed that there's like a pretty consistent theme with Ava Reid's books, which is just this idea of like women dealing with the patriarchy and trying to rise above their station. Something that I found across both of her books, almost word for word, was that in both Lady Macbeth and also Fable for the End of the World, which I didn't say the title till now, both Lady Macbeth and Fable for the End of the World have this phrase, the creature that I made you. So basically, like, the male father figure tells one of the female main characters that, like, you're the creature that I made you, basically something like that. And I thought it was so fascinating because I read these books so close together that I immediately caught on, and I was very curious to know if she wrote these books around the same time or maybe at the same time or something like that, because I literally picked up on it so quickly. So I loved Lady Macbeth. It was so well done. I loved the retelling. Macbeth and Hamlet are two of my favorite Shakespeare plays, so having a retelling surrounding Lady Macbeth was just really, really fun, and I just really enjoyed it. I love Ava Reid's writing. It's so funny because when I read The Wolf and the Woodsman, I read that as an audiobook, and now I'm suspecting that part of the reason I didn't like it might have been because of the narrator, because I didn't really love that one. And then I decided to give Juniper and Thorn a try, and Juniper and Thorn is one of my favorite books that I've ever read. Ava Reid quickly went from being like, I don't know, to I love her writing, and now with Lady Macbeth, that's just been completely solidified. With Fable for the End of the World, this was a really strange book to read, having come out of reading Sunrise on the Reaping, because what's so funny is in the acknowledgements, Ava Reid brings up the Hunger Games, and as I was reading this, I was like, why does this feel kind of like a Hunger Games ripoff? Basically, in Fable for the End of the World, you have this basically like television show called The Gauntlet, and basically when people rack up a huge amount of debt, which is 500,000 credits, which is literally just like money, when they rack up that amount of debt, then you have to either yourself or someone else be put into some sort of a draw where then they'll be potentially selected to be killed. But in like a Hunger Games-esque, like, there's like a chase and there's a show, like a whole production. So I didn't know how to feel about this because I didn't love that. I was just like, what is happening here? I didn't really like it, but I loved the characters, the two characters, Melino, I think it's Melino, and Inessa. I really liked those two characters, and I really liked their relationship, and I thought it was so cute. And what was so interesting is that I was really wondering to myself, like, am I gonna be convinced about this relationship considering kind of like where they start versus where they're supposed to end? And I found that I really did. Like, I liked it. And one thing that struck me, there's so much in this novel about similar things that kind of come up with Hunger Games, and it makes sense because it's heavily inspired very clearly by the Hunger Games. I also just loved the ideas on, again, it was dehumanization, the ideas around how we differentiate ourselves from people who are worse off or better off than us. And this one specifically also dealt a lot with like actual memory, the brain, and this idea that, like, in a world where there were ways to erase our memories, would there still be things that our minds just couldn't let go of because they end up being such an integral part of who we are? So I really did enjoy it. I don't know. it was very like, for me, it was a very like mixed feelings kind of book because I didn't love it and I didn't hate it. I would definitely recommend reading it though. So, I mean, it was good enough that I would say read it. That's the thing, is like, I wouldn't say don't read it. I wouldn't say don't waste your time. It's not a waste of time. I did really enjoy it. But at the same time, I don't know if I can say I liked it because there was like things, I don't know. I think I was just like personally affected that it was The Hunger Games, but not The Hunger Games, if that makes sense. So we have 2 books left to talk about. Next book that I read was Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry. So the first thing that I want to say is that I've just been thinking about this book as Great BBL because there's this TikTok creator, and I follow her on Instagram, who keeps referring to it as BBL. And ever since then, all I can think about is Great BBL. And it's so funny because I posted about it on my stories. Everybody was so confused. They were like, BBL? It's not my favorite Emily Henry, but not for any reason of like the book being bad. Beach Read is just still my favorite for sure. But I loved how Emily Henry kind of took a step away from the, like there was still romance in it, but she took a step back from the romance. And I really did love the way that she strayed from the romance, and it ended up being much larger than that. And the storyline with like Margaret and the celebrity paparazzi and just all of that was so, I felt like it really enriched the story. I also love that so many people were to that Taylor Swift song, Last Great American Dine. I don't know why I can't remember the song, and like my phone's up there so I can't check it. The hype around it was super cute, and I enjoyed reading it. It was fun. Julia Whalen narrated the audiobook, so it was great. And actually my Kindle is showing the ad for that. Like, if it gave me ads like this all the time, I wouldn't mind. Very fitting. And I also loved the messaging that literally was so obvious, especially towards the end where the main character decides to kind of turn her journalistic eye towards something else. And this idea that like your life doesn't need to be super glamorous or crazy to be big and beautiful. You don't have to be rich and famous and the best of the best to have had a great big beautiful life. And I just loved that. I thought it was so cute. So I did think it was so good. And I haven't seen it too much myself, but I have heard that some people didn't like it because they're like, oh, there wasn't enough romance, there wasn't enough smut. But I thought that it was great, and I thought that it was cute. And yeah, I had a good time. So thank you, Emily Henry, as always. The last book that we're going to talk about is Emily Wilde's Compendium of Lost Tales by Heather Fawcett. I read the other 2 books as ebooks on my Kindle, but this one I listened to as an audiobook. The audiobook narrator did a good job. Like, I had no problems with how she was narrating it. I think that this book was just kind of a miss for me compared to the other 2. I still enjoyed it because I like the story, and I think that this is the type of cozy fantasy among all the different versions of cozy fantasy that are out there. I think this is definitely the type of cozy fantasy that I enjoy, because I don't want it to be super goopy and like too sweet and just nothing happens. But I think among the 3 books in this one, it felt like there were lower stakes just overall than there were in the second book. So the second book is still my favorite. It was cute. I mean, I had a good time closing the chapter on this like little series, and I did enjoy it. Ultimately, I really like the format of these books, how it's kind of told in a journalistic, scholarly fashion with the little footnotes. And Emily Wilde is just such a fascinating, cute little character. Like, I love her. She's such a little nerd. I did enjoy it, but I was a little bit disappointed just because I think I enjoyed the second one more. So it was good, but it wasn't as good as the second book in my opinion. Like, I think the second book's just gonna be my all-around favorite. Oh my god, that was so many. Those are the books I read this month. I had a really good April. It was so long, and I think that helped me read way more. Again, I was super like intentional also about reading my library loans, because I had several books that I'd been waiting for holds from, and then they all came in at once, and I was just like, okay, I need to read these. Thank you for watching, and let me know what you read in April. Maybe we overlapped in some of the books that we read. I love recommendations, anything you think I should read. These are the books that I really liked on my little list. Tell me what you read. How was your April? I'm so happy that I got to read all these books, because I really did have a good time. But yeah, thank you for watching, and thank you for being here. As always, it's so lovely to know that you're here. That's all for me. I'm gonna go to bed because it is kind of late. I hope to see you guys in another video very soon. Goodbye.